This breakfast is the third breakfast in our InForum series. And to celebrate the launch or the kickoff of our third breakfast, you'll see on your tables a little InForum swag. That's what it's called. We believe these bottles promote good health and conservation and represent good ideas and good community, and we hope you enjoy the water bottles. And make sure you use them, and when people say, "What's InForum?" you can tell them about it and invite them to attend, and they can learn more about it on our website. The purpose of InForums over the last 2 years and for this year pretty much remains the same as it's been, to bring partners together, to learn together while getting to know one another, and to spark new ideas for partnership and for collaboration. We hope you will network, as I think you've been doing already this morning, and to see old friends and old colleagues, and to develop new friends and new colleagues. So just taking a moment to think about where InForum has been over the last 2 years, we looked at our survey information that each of you receive at the end of each session. And then we also do a survey in May, which you receive. And we also did a more in-depth survey where we called attendees who came to InForum frequently. So we sent emails to you, those of you who attended InForum regularly, and then we called you. For those of you who came regularly. Getting people to fill out surveys, you probably know, because you probably do these with your own organizations, is tough. So we went the extra mile and sent individual emails with your name on them, and then for those of you who didn't respond, we called you. And we got some responses back, and we just wanted to take a couple minutes to share some information with you about what we learned. The first one is just to let you know who is coming to these InForums. And I think what you see here is that we have a nice, diverse representation of leaders and of knowledge, a knowledge base of folks who come. So lots of different sectors, a nice cross-section of leaders that come with a great variety of expertise. So it's definitely not a homogeneous group of people who are here, and a great diversity of thought and experience, but perhaps sharing some similar goals around what we'd like to do in the community and our commitment to child well-being and community well-being. One of the things that we asked people in all of the surveys was if they're working in areas of low or very low child well-being. We shared the maps over the 2 years about where these areas are in our community, so we could get a sense of who is where and whether they're working directly in those areas. And we asked the question about people's interest in collaboration and in partnership, and wow, everybody's interested in learning more about that. And of course, that is, if not the primary, it is one of the focus areas of InForum. While we had, the other thing, we just pulled out a couple of quotes there were lots of quotes that we compiled, but a couple of quotes from the survey to give you a sense of the things that people were saying about the value that they found from InForum, mostly around their own social network and professional network and the value that they found for their organizations. And it's important to us to understand the value of InForum so that we can determine if this is something that we should continue, and also so that we understand how we might change InForum to make it better and more valuable to you and to our organization. And so as we kind of compiled our understanding of the value of InForum, these are some of the things that we gleaned from our survey. Inspiring partners in their work, tangible impact on programming, deepening knowledge. That's really a major goal for InForum by bringing in speakers to provide a fresh national perspective from outside of the city, and then pairing that person with a local leader to find where there is alignment, and then to engage with all of you to talk about how that applies to the work that you're doing, have you share your own questions and experience, and then to engage in a dialogue, both at your tables and then to share those thoughts with the larger group. And then just to review what we talked about for the last 2 years. These are the various topics that we covered. What we found is that we really did have a core group. We generally had, like today, we have about 120 people in the room. That was about the average of folks that we had attend these meetings. And we had generally a core group of folks who came, but then we had a mix of people that kind of came in and out. And folks generally chose to come to InForum based on the topics that were presented. And so these were the kinds of things, these were not the kinds of things, these actually were the topics that were presented to the community to discuss. And then we had lots of suggestions. Most of the suggestions that we received were around the different kinds of topics that people would like to see and discuss, and there was lots of overlap in those things, in those areas, and we've taken those into consideration as we think about the different kinds of speakers that we can bring in and how those align with child well-being and with priorities that we have around funding and around grant making and around our partners. And then we have some that you'll see that we are going to be implementing in this year, in this season in 2019. Materials online. We have a place you can go on our website where you can see InForum sessions, obviously, or not obviously. I will share with you that we have a YouTube channel where you can watch all of the InForum sessions and see all of our speakers. But we also have PowerPoint presentations that all of our speakers prepare and for all of you, and for those who are willing to share those PowerPoint presentations, those will be available online. And any materials, background reading, or articles that they think would be helpful for attendees to read, we will have those available as links online. That was one of the things that was asked for several times, multiple times from attendees when we did the survey. Small group follow-up sessions. When people receive the survey post each session, and then also in May, people will have an opportunity to express an interest in participating in a small group dialogue by sending an email to Laura. Laura, raise your hand over there, Laura Hyman. And if there are several people that want to engage in a conversation about the topic that is discussed each month, Laura will compile that information and put everybody in touch with each other so that the conversation can continue. And then finally, longer dialogue, more time to interact, which lets me know that I need to speed it up and keep it going. So that we will do by having slightly shorter presentations by our speakers, and then a longer conversation and dialogue. Today is led by Suganthi Simon, and we will try to have longer conversation, more 45 minutes, 50 minutes for people to engage with the speakers. Before I introduce Milton, we would just want to take 5 minutes or so for people to introduce themselves to your table friends, new colleagues, old and new. And so we're just going to pause here for 5 minutes, and if you would, please just introduce yourself, say anything you'd like to say to each other. We'll time that quickly, and if you would do that, we'll come back together and move on with our program. Thank you. Okay, I'm back. 5 minutes is up. Hopefully you enjoyed connecting with friends old and new. It's my pleasure now to introduce Milton J. Little. He became the president of the United Way in 2007, and for those of you who don't know, the United Way is a 125-year-old institution. It's one of the largest United Ways in the national system. Previously, Milton served as the president of the United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley. His longer bio is on the back of the agenda along with the other speakers. So I'm not going to read his full resume and bio, which is quite lengthy because he is very impressive and has done lots of things. So I'm going to just introduce him now. It's my pleasure to welcome Milton to the stage. Milton, thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Morning, everybody. And since there are a handful of you I haven't seen since the new year began, Happy New Year. I think you can still say that now, right? Maybe not in February, but I will continue to say it throughout January. It's good again to see all of you here and to have you consistently participating in these events. As Tiffany said, this is the third year, and we keep doing this because we believe in this idea of building community among practitioners, of nonprofits, of government leaders who are serious about this work, serious about making the region better and improving child well-being. And we also want to give it a forum to those investors who are passionate about the kinds of things that need to be done in community and want to see where they can invest their resources most effectively and most successfully. And so that's what we do. That's why we keep doing it. And as Tiffany sort of relayed in her summary, I think so far we've gotten reasonably good marks, but we want to make sure that we're relevant to you. And so whether it's a survey or phone call, or you just want to whisper in a member of the United Way team's ear about what could make it better, and what could keep you coming consistently, and what would make the difference for you as agency leaders and as professionals in your space, we want to make sure it's relevant for you. This is not simply us having something to say to you. This ought to be you getting something of value from it and helping direct how these InForums go. So I offer that as an invitation to you. I don't know how many of you are on Facebook. Raise your hand, Facebook or Instagram. So over the last couple of weeks, I've noticed this sort of 10-year challenge. People have been putting that picture of what they look like in 2009 and what they're looking like in 2019. So I say that to say, if the Facebook picture of United Way in 2009 was put up side by side with the 2019 picture, it would look different. You know, in 2009, we were in the midst of something called Fresh Start. We were helping the state spend $22 million of TARP money to address people who are facing some of the same challenges furloughed employees are facing right now. Where's the next meal coming from? How am I going to keep the rent paid? How am I going to keep the utilities paid? We were deep in trying to address that need all across the state. For residents who were dealing in the throes of that recession. And we were doing lots of other things, but that was like the thing that was really pulling all of our hairs out because it was just audacious and crazy. 2019, the picture would be, you know, the face of a child in a neighborhood, whether it's here in the city or all across the region, who's sort of looking at a future that may not promise to be any better than the present is. And that is not the promise that Americans need to be making to their children. The future in the American story has always been that it will be better for our children than it has been for us. But today we're not able to make that promise, and there are too many children, and the reason for the child well-being movement is that we have to fulfill that promise. And we've got to make sure this is a region where every child has the opportunity to succeed at their greatest potential, and that we ought to mobilize every bit of community resource and support that is available to that purpose. And so that would be the picture of the United Way in 2019. And many of you have seen those maps that sort of picture the status of child well-being across the region. It's color-coded, and you know, obviously you know what red means. And the greens are, you know, those are folks that are doing pretty well. I like to say those are the kids that are born on third base. They're rounding third base, heading home from the moment they're born. The thing that we have to remind those kids is that you got there not because of anything you did. You know, you got there because of the roll of the dice of birth. And that's what it's all about. And we've got to just got to increase the odds for the kids who are in those red and those yellow zones. We've got to make the odds a little bit more in their favor, so they're not simply standing outside of a ballpark watching the kids born on third base succeed. We want to make sure everybody is playing and playing successfully. And so be able to sort of color code this and be able to look down to a zip code and neighborhood level to see how kids are faring all across the region is an opportunity for us all to realize that child well-being is both an opportunity and a challenge to all of us no matter where we live. And that we all ought to feel a sense of responsibility for how we can embrace the strategies and partners and approaches that will improve the odds, because all of us in the entire region will succeed if we're able to help all of those children succeed. We went so far as to give ourselves a grade, because we needed to know where we were going to start so that we then knew how to monitor progress towards the goal that we set. And the 58.9 as a starting point is not a good one. But it is where we are. And so now we can mobilize the assets that we have as agencies and agency partners and investors and mobilize against some of the challenges that we know underlie that score, and then begin how we can improve things more successfully. It's going to take collaboration. And we all know that. It's all going to take this ability for all of us to work together. Some of you have heard me say this. I'm old enough as a professional to remember the first definition I heard of collaboration in the 80s when I began. The definition of collaboration among agencies and government was non-consenting adults getting together and not agreeing on what needs to be done. That was collaboration. And so that was the definition. We all would get in a room in a non-consenting kind of way. We didn't want to be there. And we didn't want to have to work with one another, because we all wanted to be in our lane and we all wanted to excel in our lane. And then we wanted everybody else to do what we did because we were best at what it was. And it wasn't about how we can sort of merge forces and do things in a uniform kind of way so that the whole community, all those boats would rise. So we've got to have a new definition of collaboration, which is one built on shared need, shared sense of responsibility, shared sense of a common set of interest, and figuring out what I do well, what you do even better, and maybe I don't have to do it if I don't do it as well, but find the things that I do well so that this whole net is held together in a way that protects and serves everybody. And I think all of us realize that there are some things that we do, but there are some things that other folks need to do and can do better. So I'm going to ask by a show of hands. So who among you in the work that you're doing knows of a nonprofit that's focused on a different issue than your organization but serves the same population, serves the same families? How many of you know organizations that are serving the same people that you do but are doing different things? Just by a show of hands. You know, almost everybody seems to know that. Who in this room here partners with an organization that serves the same population that you serve? Yeah, I see. We got some collaboration going on here. Raise your hand if you have formalized this partnership through some kind of mechanism, whether it's an agreement, whether it's shared intake forms, or what kind of thing. So we got a little less of that going on, but we've got some seedlings here. But it's great to see. I mean, we're all recognizing that we're not islands among ourselves. And the folks that we serve are not islands alone either. And how can we all come together in a much more robust kind of way? All of that leads to today's session and today's theme. The theme, Systems Thinking in the South, Integrated Service Delivery. And so we've got three speakers, some of whom you know and some who you don't, who are going to really lead this conversation. They're going to talk about their approaches to leveraging resources, to lowering barriers, to getting better outcomes for children and families that they want to serve. Integrated systems require a much more intentional and intense degree of collaboration. And there's a higher investment that's required, but the payoff is generally much higher as well. So we've asked these folks not simply to talk about their own efforts and successes from a programming standpoint, but also from a systems level perspective. And as we ask every one of our speakers, we ask them to be candid. There's no press here, so you're not going to get quoted in the AJC. And so, speak from the heart, but speak from your experience, but speak the truth. Tell folks what you've learned that works. Tell folks what you've learned that doesn't work, so that we can all learn from both of those as well. And finally, as we work in the community, we want to hear the community voices. And so this is, again, you all have been here before. This is not simply some talking heads and then you walk out of here. You get a chance to sort of ask some questions and share your perspectives and bring the best that you have, but also bring sort of that thing that sort of haunts you, that you haven't quite figured out, because some of the folks up here may have a little bit of a clue to how you can overcome some of those things. And there's probably some who've had some real success in integrated service delivery, and we want to hear from you as well. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our speakers to come up here. I'm going to introduce them briefly and then tell you how we'll begin. So first, we'll start with Ralph Gildehaus. He's a senior program director for MDC, which is located in North Carolina. Ralph leads MDC's economic security practice, which works with communities to design, build, and support of systems for connecting vulnerable populations with supports and services. His team recently developed the Integrated Services Delivery Network model, envisioned as a technology-enabled network of service providers working together to connect low-income families with integrative services and supports. Ralph, come on up here. Next is John Moeller. John's got more than 25 years of experience in ministry on nonprofit leadership before joining what was then Lutheran Services of Georgia, and he'll tell you the new name. He joined it in February 2017. He served as CEO of Action Ministries here in Atlanta and CEO of Must Ministries in Marietta. The formerly known as Lutheran Services works with abused, neglected children, adults with intellectual disabilities, refugees and immigrants, and disaster victims in more than 60 counties across Georgia. And finally, Suganthi Simon joined the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation in 2014. She's the program officer and provides grant leadership for the Westside Neighborhood Prosperity Fund. So everyone, come on up here, and you can take your seats on the stage, and we'll begin with Ralph. Come on up.
So, who here is old enough to remember the Jefferson sitcom? Come on, don't be shy. So, as you remember, that was a spin-off of All in the Family, and George Jefferson, he ran a laundromat business, and they moved from Queens to the East Side. To a deluxe apartment in the sky, right? We finally got a piece of the pie, right? Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about creating local human services ecosystems to help advance people up the economic ladder, and specifically talking about a model called Integrated Services Delivery, or Integrated Services Delivery Network, and how we're working to bring that to communities across the South. So I'll tell you just briefly about MDC. We're based in Durham. We work with communities on shaping the South where all people thrive. That's our vision. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary, and we mark that anniversary with this report called Recovering Our Courage. How the South has made considerable progress over the last 50 years, but by the same token, too many people and places face persistent equity, opportunity, and mobility challenges. And we say in this report and explain how these challenges are holding back the region, its communities, and its people. So to briefly summarize some of those challenges, poverty is growing, concentrating, suburbanizing, particularly for people of color You see that trend in Atlanta and lots of cities in the South. There are large racial income gaps, high incarceration rates, increasing post-secondary attainment disparities despite overall gains. And those overall gains are often achieved in communities mainly by importing talent, not from local talent development. So the way that also expresses itself in terms of mobility is that when you look at this data from the Equality of Opportunity Project at Harvard University, this is upward mobility across the United States, the chance that someone born into the bottom fifth of the income scale will move to the top. And mobility, as you see, is lowest in the South. It's the region that has the lowest economic mobility. Atlanta, there's a 4% chance of someone moving from the bottom to the top. And if you define the American dream as where you start out should not define where you end up, the American dream is threatened across the United States, and particularly in the South. So we also have this paradox going on in the South of southern cities that are thriving. I was really struck. It had been a while since I've been in Atlanta. In a former life, I was a trial attorney, and one of my biggest clients was Georgia Pacific, so I've been here lots of times. This is a dynamic, growing, thriving city, just like Raleigh, near where I'm from. But at the same time, Forbes' Best for Business cities also have low economic mobility on a scale where 1 is the least mobile and 729 is the most mobile of the commuting zones in the United States. Atlanta is 96, and poverty continues to grow here like it's growing in many thriving southern cities. This is a graph also based on the Equality of Opportunity Project about the chances of moving up from the bottom into other quintiles in Atlanta. And so people are a lot of people are stuck in place. We like to think of it that way. So our analysis is that there's some realities and imperatives for the South. A diversifying population and a track record over time where southern communities are currently and historically challenged to foster the talent development and increase the economic participation and mobility of diverse populations, particularly low-income households, that the future of the South and southern communities really depends on doing a much better job in that regard. So sometimes I feel when I start with that, I feel a little bit like Debbie Downer coming someplace, right? So what's the answer? So MDC looks at it as it's important for communities to build what we call an infrastructure of opportunity. That is, place-based systems to support the inclusive talent development and the economic success of diverse populations, particularly low-income households. So, how do you do that? Right? Change is hard. I'm from the Philadelphia area, so I can make a joke about Philadelphia. So, a Philadelphia ward leader heard once that reform was coming to Philadelphia. And the ward leader said, snorted back, "Reform? We have enough problems without reform," right? So, that joke works better in Philadelphia for some odd reason. So this is a crash course in MDC's requirements for place-based change. This is how we work with communities to effectuate change. And we see change taking place at the intersection of leadership, culture, and systems. And I'll explain each a little bit. And I'll do this in the context of an example. We partnered with stakeholders in Brownsville, Texas, to improve post-secondary attainment there. That's one of our goals as an organization. We worked in Brownsville to change the conversation and change who was in the conversation. People working on post-secondary attainment. There was almost no one of color participating in a town that's, has a very large Hispanic Latino population. So we changed that, working with community stakeholders. We also work to change culture. We have a saying at MDC that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Changing culture is really about changing community habits and attitudes, which ultimately are going to affect systems and outcomes. So the stakeholders there decided to have every high school student complete the FAFSA and apply to at least one college. But there were cultural barriers in the way of that. There were messages about, college is not for everyone. I personally think there was some code involved in there. College was not for people of color. I think what was the way that was really interpreted in the community. People changed those attitudes, perceptions about what college really was. People were thinking about a 4-year degree at a leafy campus, and a lot of people said, that's not for me. I could never afford that, not realizing that the community college just down the road had, associate program or credential programs that were much less expensive and would be a road to better employment. So we helped change that. Now, do you think the technical intervention would have worked with those same kind of community attitudes prevailing? We don't think so. Ultimately, the last part, the intervention, was a systems change. That is, the high schools made it a priority that every student would complete the FAFSA and apply to at least one college. And they did that by changing the way that was done within the school, and they reserved time in a history class, for example, for students to complete the forms during that time. For the last 3 years, every student in Brownsville's high schools have applied to at least one college and completed the FAFSA, and more students are beginning to go to college. Post-secondary attainment hasn't changed quite yet. That takes a while to do that. But that's kind of how systems change works in a community. And ultimately, we think you have to change systems in order to change outcomes. Another MDC saying is that systems are perfectly designed to achieve the outcomes that they achieve. So if there's low economic mobility, or on these maps here where you have those red zones, your system is working exactly right to do that. If you want to change those outcomes, you have to change your systems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the area that I work in, which is building a local human services ecosystem. And from our experience in our economic security practice at MDC, we see that there are 3 main components to help low-income people begin to move up the economic ladder. One, they need stabilization. Maslow taught us, from the hierarchy of needs, if people are just struggling with their basic needs, they're not going to make major changes in their lives. 2, people need to be prepared for better paying work. And 3, people need to consolidate their gains through financial education and coaching. Not, financial coaching right at the beginning, because that kind of implies that poor people, aren't good at managing their finances, and that's why they're poor. I find that low-income people are great at managing their finances. They just don't have enough resources. So the strategy that matches that experience and theory of change is called integrated services delivery. And the idea is to sequence and bundle 3 types of services: work, health, and income supports, education and career advancement, and financial education and coaching. This strategy was developed by the Annie Casey Foundation and others, and has been tested throughout the country in various places, and in a seminal study showed that when households receive these bundled services, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to receive a significant financial outcome. That is increased employment, education, employment, income, financial stability. So, major results. We also know how this works at the local level. This is an example of an ISD model up the road from us in Greensboro, North Carolina, implemented by the United Way of Greater Greensboro at a Head Start Center. They've now moved to a second center at Salvation Army, and the families that are there have experienced higher rates of growth on 26 of 29 indicators of economic sufficiency and stability compared to a similar group. So there's lots of other examples. LISC Financial Opportunity Centers, for example, a good example. And my colleagues here will be talking about some of examples of how they're moving to integrated services delivery. The headline here is Integrated Services Works at Physical Locations. So the challenge is that being able to implement integrated services delivery at these kind of one-stop centers, that's a very expensive way to do that. It's about $500,000 for the Family Success Center in Greensboro. That's pretty high operating costs. But nonetheless, communities are experiencing these issues on a much broader scale. So what we were challenged to do with United Way of Greater Greensboro is how can we take this same basic integrated services delivery approach and implement it across the community? So we came up with this idea of an integrated services delivery network, which is basically public and nonprofit providers working together in a network to provide integrated services. So a client could access online via local agencies or via telephone. People tell me I should change this telephone. I'll get to it. It needs to be a cell phone. So a common technology will help with client intake, assessment, connection to those 3 different pillars of integrated services delivery. And the technology and the network working together will track client progress. You'll know this as collective impact. I saw that you've had some collective impact speakers here. That's what's kind of underlying this. The United Way is the coordinating agency, or what collective impact calls the backbone organization. So we have been working with the community to develop this model. We're doing so in a 4-step process. We convened a community design group, which I'll talk about briefly. We're in the stage right now of preparing for initial implementation, and then we'll have a 2-year initial implementation period and evaluation, and then move to full operation. I want to be very clear where we are right now. We're right here in this box. I received an email this morning from one of my colleagues who says, I'm very concerned that we don't have all the steps, on the critical path from here to here. And I said, I think I'm going to address that email on the plane because I need to focus on this today. But I just want to tell you, it's hairy. I mean, it's hard work. And that's what we're in the midst of. Our design was composed of about a 15-member design team, a much larger 60-member community advisory council, work groups. We engaged with low-income families through various listening sessions. We recruited community advisors to help us with that. We think of this as a network of networks. There were already networks in the community doing this work. We're organizing those disparate networks into one big network. And we think of this, we completed a community design process, so there's a published design of this approved by the design team, the advisory council, the United Ways board. We have lots of buy-in to this. We think of this as increasing usage, that is, that's sort of the output measure, with these long-term goals of outcomes that we'll measure across the community. So we're really looking to produce two-generation impacts. So one, practice shows that ISD is really a systems change. We're changing the way human systems are delivered. Brain science shows that when you bundle multiple services with navigation assistance at convenient locations, people are more likely to take advantage of those services. And three, research shows that children in economically stable households, right, are more likely to have be better prepared for school and experience better health, education, and employment outcomes as adults. Something I thought you'd be interested in with your focus on early childhood development here is that we have a partnership between the Greater Guilford ISD Network and a early childhood development initiative called Get Ready Guilford. We plan to use the same technology. They're going to screen every family with a young child in Guilford County, which is where Greensboro is located. They're going to be delivering early childhood interventions to those families. The ISD network is going to deliver services to the low-income population within that larger cohort. We also have realized that the kind of outcomes that ISD generates are also social determinants of health. So we're trying to figure out, how do we integrate with the health systems in Greensboro as well. So we think we've been changing the conversation really about collaboration. I think, as Milton said, collaboration, often was what was ordered by the funders way back when in Greensboro. Even when we started with the design team, people allegedly working in the same area, we had lots of people exchanging business cards and asking each other out to lunch so they could talk about what each organization did. They didn't even know each other when we started. Ultimately, we're trying to change the human services delivery ecosystem in Greensboro. So here's where we are now. We have 3 steps that we're seeking to complete. One is we need to complete that first pilot, which has that email waiting for me as soon as I finish here, to make sure that we've built a proof of concept there. 2, we want to bring the model to 2 more communities to pilot it in at least 2 more places. You have a very dynamic, thriving city with obviously a lot of engaged people, so maybe Atlanta would be a good place. And then third, we want to develop what we're going to tentatively call a Family Economic Success Institute, where we want to spread this model through a multi-site institute. Right now, we're working one-on-one with Greensboro, and there's a lot of advantages to doing that in the beginning. I spend an awful lot of time in Greensboro. I'm not on the blood donor list at the United Way, but when I am, I know I will have been there too long. What this institute will do is work with multiple communities at the same time, work with leadership groups. We'd be working with cohorts of 3 or 4 communities at the same time. So that's what we're doing, and I thank you very much for your time and attention. Here's my contact information if you're interested in contacting me, and I look forward to our discussion.
So, good morning. I'm John Moeller, and I am the president and CEO of Lutheran Services of Georgia, now called Inspiritus. And I got the invitation to come and speak back in, November? And I really had no idea what the topic was, but never one to shrink from a microphone. I said, sure. And I thought integrated service delivery, I don't even know what that is. I'm going to have to go do some study, some research about what is integrated service delivery. And then I realized, oh my goodness, we are all over this. We are doing this. So it was really encouraging to realize that we actually did have something to say. But imagine, if you will, that Ralph is the mad scientist, and we are the lab rat. And so he's got these ideas, he's got the science, and we are the ones actually doing the work on the ground, piloting and trying this out to see how it works. At Lutheran Services of Georgia, now Inspiritus, we had 4 different service lines of business. We served adults with disabilities. We serve families and children who've been abused, neglected, and are medically fragile. We serve refugees and immigrants, and we also work with disaster victims. And those are really broad and wide-ranging populations. And the board looked at me upon my hire and said, which of these business lines do we need to be in? Which ones do we need to get out of? And all of a sudden, my task was to look and pick and choose and say yes and no. And so I started with the question, what do these programs have in common? And what do the clients that we serve have in common? And what we learned is that every single person we serve is a survivor. They are amazing, they are strong, they are resilient. And every single one of them is on a path from surviving to thriving. And what we learned is that the programs that we employ are all involved in helping people on that path. And rather than bringing expertise into their lives, yes, we do that, but we're really going to harness and help them discover their own strengths and resilience. And then we're going to simply accompany them on a path until they are full contributors to the community. And I think what we realize, and many of you in the audience realize, is that the community is missing the voice of those who've been pushed to the margins. And so our job is to reactivate that voice and help the community realize that we're missing out. We are missing out on their voice. And so that's our mission. It's a new mission for us, but it works and it fits. As a result of this work of reevaluating our mission, we had to do a deep dive on our values, our DNA, our shared core competencies. We restructured. We have new success measures, and the success measures are geared around surviving to thriving. Every program had its own outcomes, but in almost every case, we needed to know, were people's basic needs being met? Were they safe and stable? Were they safe and secure? Were they connecting to the community? And finally, were they self-sufficient? Or in the case of people with disabilities, were they self-actualizing? Were they making their own decisions? So it was a complete shift in terms of the way we think about the way we measure success. And I want to point to Milton and Tiffany and what the United Way is doing, and the Child Wellbeing Index helped us rethink about how we look at ourselves and what success looks like. A new strategic plan came out of this, and frankly, a focus on integrated service delivery. Sir Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And it was 2 years ago that we got a new president. And at our organization, it impacted us almost immediately. We serve refugees. And almost immediately upon entering office, the president determines that we will cut the number of refugees coming from around the globe precipitously. And that number was approaching 90,000, and it was going to be cut to 45,000. And then the next year it was going to be cut again by another 50%. And finally, we were going to end up around 22,000 refugees. And as an organization that serves refugees, we were basically going to get put out of business by this kind of information and knowledge, and we were going to manage ourselves into obsolescence, or we were going to kind of take that challenge and really look at our mission and look at the integrated services that we could put in place, see how we could harness energies across, and so that's what we've done. And what we've done with that is we've opened something called the Financial Opportunity Center. And Ralph talked about the integrated service delivery model of financial opportunity centers, and we have one. It's located in Clarkston. So we're going to hear from Suganthi in a minute, who's working heavily on the west side, and we are working heavily on the east side. And the idea of the Financial Opportunity Center is, as Ralph indicated, to bring income supports, helping individuals and families access mainstream benefits, okay? Secondly, helping them with career and employment opportunities, and that is everything from job readiness to a placement, so having a staffing agency, career pathing, so that everybody gets the first job, but the first job isn't the last job, we hope. We hope it's going to lead to greater things, and connecting people to education and training. So income supports, career and employment supports, and finally, financial coaching. And financial coaching goes well beyond that basic budgeting that we're all accustomed to doing. It's budgeting, yes, but it's helping people understand banking and banking products. Working with individuals from around the globe, there's an inherent distrust in the banking system around the globe. And so people use the bank that's located underneath their mattress oftentimes. And so we have worked very hard to help people understand the banking system, banking products, and then even go so far as understanding credit, how to use credit, how to access loans, and finally working with people and providing tax services. Now, those are all program-oriented services, and they're vital, but what the Financial Opportunity Center does is it integrates those into one place, so you don't leave one program center and go across, even leave the door and walk down the hallway to another program. They're all located in one place, and our staff rotate through the Financial Opportunity Center. We have one case file for the clients that we get to work with, and rather than being program-focused, it's really a framework. And rather than measuring the outcomes strictly around did someone get a job or did they raise their income, we're measuring things around net worth, around job stability, and certainly around greater income. So, and one of our success measures that we're looking at is how well are people accessing the bundle that Ralph talked about. And so far, we opened in October, and 85% of our clients have accessed more than 2 services. So that's a good sign. And I'll give you an example of a client just this week who came into the Financial Opportunity Center, and to show you how it's working. Big families, multiple people working in the family, and so somebody quit their job because they heard that if they made too much money, they would lose their food stamp benefits. And so they came in, they were meeting with one of the coaches, and that immediately triggered a referral to the financial coaching to say, whoa. We need you to understand better how this food stamp thing works. They were going to make a horrible decision to cut their income so that they could preserve this small food stamp benefit. And so it was great to be able to trigger, to send somebody over for financial coaching and to better understand the public benefits. So that's a little bit about the Financial Opportunity Center. I also want to talk about disasters. So never let a good disaster or crisis go to waste. We work with disaster victims, and in recent years, we've not done a lot because Georgia has been out of the limelight of hurricanes. In fact, Savannah touted itself as the city that had not received a direct hit from a hurricane in 100 years. And in the last 18 months, Georgia has had 3 hurricanes now hit our land. And we have this program to do construction management. And so we help rebuild homes. And boy, does that make us feel good every time we see a new roof on a house and the mold has been remediated and sheetrock's been replaced. But too often times what we were learning is that just because the house got put back together doesn't mean the family got put back together. And now that we're thinking integrated, and some of our core competencies across all the program areas are community engagement, case management, and housing, we are now bringing case management to every family whose house we work on. And so we are, not only is their house put back together, but hopefully they, as a family, are going to thrive. And finally, here in Atlanta, youth homelessness has popped up on everyone's radar screen. We've known that it's an issue for years, but it finally came to the city's attention, to the Regional Commission on Homelessness, to the mayor's office, that we've got to do something. And at Lutheran Services of Georgia, now in Spiritus, we have stepped up into that void and brought expertise. And it wasn't until we did this deep dive on integrated services to learn that what we do with foster families, foster care, and what we do with intellectual disabled adults around providing a home environment. So adults with intellectual disabilities oftentimes live where? On the streets, in nursing homes, state-run hospitals. Or they're fortunate enough to live with their own family of origin who takes care of them. But what happens when that family can no longer care for that individual? They head to the streets, they go to nursing homes, they go to state-run hospitals. Our program service delivery model is one in which we take those people out of those settings and we place them with a family across the region who's missing something in their own family's life. And they want to have one of those persons come and live with them permanently. And so we looked at the expertise that we have with foster care and the expertise we have with the host home program. We put those together, and now we'll be launching a youth host home program for young people, ages 17 to 24, who oftentimes have aged out of the foster care system and who oftentimes are LGBTQ, and we're going to be able to place them, rather than in a shelter, rather than in an institutional setting, we're going to be able to place them with families, and they will go to live with them for up to 9 months. And while they're in that kind of a setting, we'll be able to connect them to the Financial Opportunity Center. We'll be able to connect them to much-needed nursing, to behavioral analysts who can look at the psychotropic medicines that they've been prescribed that are maybe not working with each other. And so we're looking at integrated service delivery in place-based programming and all across the state. And so just real quick, you're going to hear about Lutheran Services of Georgia, and now you're going to hear about Inspiritus. They're not two different organizations. They are one, and we changed our name this week. And so we've seen our services expand. We've seen the territory expand. And so therefore, the new name means, it's actually a real word. We didn't invent it. It's a Latin word. It means to fill with courage or strength of purpose, to encourage, to enliven, to infuse with spirit or life. And that's really what we do. The word in spirit is a verb. And so we fill people with courage and strength of purpose. And it does reflect what we do. And so it's not a move away from faith. We continue to be a faith-based organization, but we're one of the more inclusive organizations out there. And so we wanted to send the message that we are a diverse organization, and we want to drop the barriers that the community would feel to work with us and to be involved. And so that's our logo. You'll see it around town. We hope you'll see it more and more. And if you don't have a place to be on Monday, and there's lots of organizations doing incredible work, volunteer service days around town, but if you have not connected with something and you're looking for a place to be, we're going to have a day of service, yes, and learning. And we put the two together. It's a day of service and a day of learning. We're going to host something called Fearless Dialogues that morning as a part of our day of service. And so we invite you to join us from 8:30 to 1 and at Christ the King Lutheran Church in Peachtree Corners. So I think that concludes my remarks, and I think we move into the facilitated dialogue. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out this morning. And I know it was a little bit chilly. We're sitting still for a little while. Thank you for Tiffany and Milton inviting me to be part of this discussion. And I was confessing to the other panelists that I was like, I am not a morning person. I'm a solid 12 to 3 person. But I realized I wasn't being generous enough with myself. 11 to 4. I'm really good at 11 to 4. But I wanted to start our conversation a little bit with a video just to give you some context for the work that we're doing with the Arthur and Blank Family Foundation in the historic neighborhoods of the West Side. So welcome to the West Side, if you didn't know that's where you are. So I'm going to show this video and then give you a little bit on what we're doing.
Got to have the original people that's from this neighborhood to be involved in order to reach our people. You can't make a plan without us.
We have called English Avenue the community of broken promises because for so many years that's what we have experienced. But I want you to know today marks a new milestone in the life of our community.
We're trying to get the neighborhood to use that clinic again. We'd love to see you come up there for your health needs.
I've been here doing community health work, advocating for this community. We want to see everybody do well. We want to see everybody shine.
We have a lot of kids that go through a lot, you know. Sometimes you may not know, like you see them for the first day, you know, they all smiling and stuff, but when they leave here, they're going through a struggle.
We get a lot of referrals that on paper look like ADHD, ODD kind of behaviors, but what we're finding across schools, across districts is so much trauma. They were just evicted, their housing unstable, they've doubled up with another family and they're all in one room looking for more stable employment. There's a lot of basic needs, and until they're met, we can't possibly think that they're going to be able to come in and focus on treatment.
When you're a parent, you don't want to ever see them hurt. You don't want to ever hear about them in pain. You don't want to ever hear about them not being okay. My baby had woke up 3 nights in a row. One night he was literally saying, help me, help me. He couldn't have enough air to even speak. It hurts the most because if I was financially stable, I could fix this like that. But because I have this journey that's just a more difficult journey, it's hard. It's hard to know where we're gonna live. And I never want to make that a part of who they are. That's not their concern, that's my concern. I hope I can provide a home for my children.
Anything starts off small, just like a seed of a tree. You see a little change, and then it catches on. It catches on a little bit more, until everything just comes into place.
You can look back and see what the community used to be and what it is now. Only thing I can do is tip my hat to everyone who stayed in the neighborhood, and everyone who fought for the neighborhood, and everyone that reached out to help bring other partners in the neighborhood to beautify and to uplift this neighborhood. We need to stay and fight. We don't need to up and leave. It's what can I do in order to help change our neighborhood? What can we do?
So I showed that video not to pathologize what's happening in the neighborhood, but to lift up the voices and the hope of the residents who work there. So I have the power and the privilege to work for the community that we serve in the West Side. And I hope you heard those voices. This work started in 2014. The foundation had always invested in the West Side neighborhoods, but it wasn't necessarily done in a strategic way. As you know, there's a new stadium just down the road, and that stadium created the catalyst for creating these community conversations about what the community wanted to see with strategic investments. So we started talking to the neighborhood about what we knew was a long list of issues. The West Side doesn't look like the West Side looks for a variety of reasons. And it's historic, it's structural racism, and understanding systems, right? Systems didn't just happen. There's a reason why the neighborhood looks the way it is, but people are choosing to stay there and fight and serve their community. And we talk about being in the shadows of greatness. This was Dr. King's home, Maynard Jackson was here, Julian Bond was here. And I don't think of it as in the shadows of greatness, we're in the spirit of greatness. And in that spirit, we have a call to work with the residents to think through how we do this in a way that is actually going to create long-term systems change and actually start to unravel some of the pieces that were put in place that created the issues that we see. You know, when we talk about equity, you know, yes, born poor, you're gonna die poor unless you start to unravel the systems. So what we are trying to do is actually take a systems approach to this work, and that we need to work in all of these areas, whether it's education, health, economic inclusion, civic empowerment and engagement, and that part of that is letting residents tell their history and story of the neighborhoods, crime and safety, and then working on some of the place-based, the actual infrastructure. So there are a lot of statistics about the neighborhood, and it is very much from a deficit perspective. But the residents said, well, we want to make sure we have jobs, we want to make sure we have access to health care, we want to make sure we have all the things that many of us enjoy in our own neighborhoods. So from that, we really started thinking about all of the place-based efforts that we have. So we have a number of providers who are providing wonderful services through Westside Works, through Chris 180 with mental behavioral health services. We have community health workers. You heard one of her voices in the video. She's been a fourth generation resident of English Avenue. We have the On the Rise Financial Center, and all of our partners are providing a wealth of resources to residents. However, we know from a ground level, because we have people out touching residents every day, that it becomes very difficult. We create hurdles. We're not all in the same building. If you say to somebody who comes to Westside Works and they are having trouble with childcare and transportation, and they have a child who's sick at home, that you say, well, go over there and they'll be happy to work with you. And that is absolutely true. However, the moment you put a barrier in front of a resident who already has some existing challenges of saying, well, I work 3 shifts, I don't have stable housing, how am I going to go over there? And so as we started working with everybody, we said, well, we've got to start addressing multiple issues, right? And so we've started what's called Westside Connect. Now, as a funder, we have the ability to talk to all the partners we are funding and say, let's start Westside Connect. And this gets back to what the spirit of collaboration is. There is underlying to all of this the desire to serve and to meet people where they are and to meet their needs. And so based on that, what we are trying to do is create the relationships, not from a funder as you shall or you should, but if we are all serving, then how are we serving people the right way? And so if we can start to do common assessment and intake forms that ask people a variety of questions, whether they're coming in for financial coaching, whether they're coming in for a job, whether they're going to the health clinic or talking to the community health worker, about all the other needs that you might have as a family or as an individual. and then actually providing the warm handoff between service providers. So to say, if you come into Westside Works and say, I'm actually food insecure, I have trouble with transportation, I don't have childcare, and I need some help with, I don't feel safe in my home. Well, what happens to that information? Who gets it? And then how does somebody follow up? And so we are creating a system of saying, well, how do we provide warm handoffs? So if you come in and you start flagging some things, that person who's your intake case manager will start saying, let me actually make the call, make the appointment. This is who you're going to go see on Monday. Do you have a way of getting there? Can we get you the transportation you need? And then we're going to follow up with you. And all of that takes a network and it takes a system. And as we've started doing this, there's a tendency and a feeling of you should lead with technology, and we've been trying to avoid that, of this isn't a technology, this is about people. And so the more we can get people to start working together, the more we can start addressing this. And eventually we will have a technology system. Eventually we will probably think about centralized case management, but it is about all of our partners working together. And as we approach the King weekend, I reflect on that interrelated sense of mutuality, right? And that we aren't doing this work alone. One funder can't do it, one nonprofit can't do it, that we do need to work together if we are actually going to create this shared garment of our mutual destiny, right? And that it is a privilege to serve the West Side and to live into that spirit of greatness. So from that, I think we are going to start our panel. I don't think we have any more slides. Well, I guess we didn't really leave any room for questions or discussion, and so should we start with opening the conversation? I think we've given you all a lot. Somebody has to have one question. We should have planned to, okay.
Ganthy, I loved how you said that we can't lead with technology, we have to lead with people. They come first, building the trust, the relationships of partners. But as TechBridge, I'd be remiss to not talk about technology. And so Ralph, my question is for you, is how have you used technology? And I'm really interested in the barriers for nonprofits to participate in that common platform. Do they have their own data management systems? Have you built APIs from their data management systems to your common platform? Do they have to use 5 different platforms that funders recommend, and then your community portal is another platform that they have to use? So what are the barriers for nonprofits? And then I'm also interested, Ralph, in the level of data sharing that you're doing in your collaborative. And could you see Milton Little has gotten a job placement and he's retained his job and he's done really well, and now he's building financial assets. And can you look at, here's the 7 or 8 programs and services that Milton received along his way, his journey to success. So I'd love for you to talk about data sharing, technology, and what you all have done in North Carolina.
Sure. So we're in the throes of selecting a technology, and your knowledge is so great. There's an advisory council meeting on January 22nd in Greensboro. So the technology situation is complicated, and I completely agree about the problem of leading with technology. I almost try not to say it in the community, because as soon as you say it, people want to talk about technology and think that's the solution, but there are big technical challenges. So we have an oddity. We've been at this work building the kind of people systems side for the last year and a half. And our State Department of Health and Human Services decided to try to implement a referral technology across the whole state at once, and magically decided that Greensboro would be a good place because there's so much work being done there, which of course is kind of crazy, and they're coming at it from a different perspective than we are. We're trying to work that out. And meanwhile, get ready, Guilford has its own idea about technology. So we're trying to work that out, and we're very much in the throes of it. We do want, there are a number of principles that we do have. One, we want the clients to own their own data. Two, we want to eliminate as much as we possibly can double entry at the case manager level. Three, we want to empower clients with choices, and also be able to provide some information about, well, here's a possible suggested pathway for you, what you might call, if you're kind of using healthcare language, kind of like a care plan or a strategy that would be embedded in the technology. And we spent a good, day on this last week, talking through all of these issues. We have another day coming up on the 22nd to do just the same thing. So we're in the process, and we've convened a community-wide advisory council that has about 40 people on it of, various technical skills. We have the county there, and the IT director of the school system, trying to make sure that we address all of the issues that you've raised. I wish we had them resolved. Maybe in 6 months we will.
Hi, my name is Mary Sheffield. I've been working as a volunteer with United Way for a long time. In the last year, I've had the fortunateness to be recruited by other organizations who are really on the ground. So I have a question. One of the things, I've been doing a lot of work with the West Side Watershed Management, the Atlanta Watershed Network, and such as that. So I've been working really closely on the ground with people, residents in the West Side. And one of the things that I really didn't understand until I started spending time there was the level of distrust that exists. And I also know that in Clarkston, because of working in the past in Clarkston repeatedly, with that, but I think that your audience actually is a little bit more open. They may be fearful, but they're willing to try to trust. So one of the questions that I have is, it doesn't matter how many things you bring to people and how many approaches you come up with, if you don't deal with the basic lack of trust in the institutional racism that people have dealt with and internalized racism and such as issues of equity, you're not going to make headway. So how are y'all addressing that issue? And do you even see that is an issue? I mean, I may be wrong, but how are you addressing that is something I would like to know, because I think we don't make any movement on any of these fronts if we don't deal with the on-the-ground obstacle to moving forward.
No, and the one-word answer is yes to all of that, right? And as I said, I mean, the West Side didn't show up looking like the West Side overnight. You could talk about Northside Drive coming through the neighborhood. You could talk about the first dome and how it was plopped over a community called the Lightning Community. And there was certainly a lot of trust broken when the new stadium was built. And so you've just got to go in with eyes wide open on that. When I started working for the foundation 4 years ago, I actually wasn't working on the West Side. I was working on multiple initiatives and spending part of my time on the West Side. And I fell in love with the people, and I fell in love with the neighborhoods. And I said, I want to work on the West Side. And so when I say it is a privilege to work there, it absolutely is. And so that is my job, to go out and create relationships and build relationships. And it is not something that's done overnight. And I learn a lot about myself every day, and I learn a lot about the neighborhood every day, and they learn about me. And we talk. So it's not always that we agree. It's not always that the foundation gets it right. It's not always that our partners get it right. But we are not going anywhere, and we don't plan on going anywhere. And I think every day that you're there and you show up means something, right? Because I think that is part of the underlying distrust, is that people will come in, plop down, say, oh, this is where everybody wants to be on the West Side, and that you really have no intention of staying and hearing and working with them. And so that is, it's not a one-word answer, and it's not an easy answer, but it's also hearing and understanding and responding. And so the response is critical, because if you just show up and have a conversation and say, I hear you, and then nothing happens, that is further erodes the trust. And so that is what we are trying to do, is that power of many, of getting a lot of different voices in the room, about getting a lot of different partners in the room, and thinking about what long-term means. This isn't about, it wasn't just about opening the stadium, it wasn't just about the Super Bowl in 2 weeks, it is not going to be about just the next big event, it is going to be about what is 20 to 30 years of investment look like to actually keep people who want to stay in the West Side in the West Side. What does it mean to retain the culture and the history of the West Side? And so those are not easy conversations, but we have them often.
As a follow-up, how do you get, as a grassroots person, one of the frustrations I face is that it's like, well, we gave you money for 2 times, you didn't change the world. And that is a real issue. I mean, because no matter and I love every organization that you have up there, but when it comes right down to it, you know, it's just like, for example, Fulton County Schools just changed their remedial teacher-child ratio to 1 to 32. I don't know how you're going to take a child that's a teenager who reads at a 4th grade level and put him in a class with 32 other kids and then complain about the fact that he messed up your data. You know, how do we make sure that we actually fund the people on the ground? I mean, I love the fact that you're out in the community, and I see effect of your foundation out there, so I see that. But how do we get everyone else to stop thinking just about numbers, or just about, I gave you this much money and you didn't change the world in 5 minutes? You know, that is, I think, because it doesn't really matter how much we talk about everything else if we don't talk about what you're talking about, of being on there, being consistent and working on the ground to address those issues. It doesn't matter how much we do. So that is, I need that encouragement as a grassroots in my InForum existence. I need the encouragement that there is support for grassroots movements and grassroots people, and the people that are out there standing next to the people that are in your video. And I just don't see that.
Yeah, no, it is, I mean, that is I would say that is part of, there's a lot of conversations right now about what philanthropy is and what it has stood for. And there are funders out there who say, well, I gave you the money, but you were never set up to succeed. And that, you know, we are having those conversations about, if you want somebody to succeed, then it's always a couple of groups that always get the money. And that means a lot of people on the ground aren't getting the money. What happens is when you say, well, we're going to give money and we want to do things quickly, and you give a large pool of money to a large group, and then what they do is go and turn to community and say, how do we do this? And then the community they ask for the expertise doesn't get the funds. And so we are working on that internally, right? About how you change grant making and how you start to actually fund people on the ground doing the work. And some of that is an internal systems conversation about, because your grant systems weren't designed for that. And some of it was thinking about capacity building too, of how do we get people the resources and the tools that they need so that they can step up and partner in a way that actually works for the grassroots organization. So it's a yes. It's a yes. It's just, it takes some time, and sometimes I understand there's an urgency of now.
Hi, Christina with the Gildehaus. I hear a common theme around financial coaching and education, and that's something that we also incorporate in our work. I'm interested if you are developing your own curriculum or if you have found a curriculum that fits. I'm finding it hard to find curriculum geared toward low-income families and how to manage finances when the resources are very, very limited. So I'd be interested to hear what kind of resources or programs you're finding success with. Thank you.
I'm happy to speak from our experience. In Spiritus, I'm still getting used to saying it. We are working with LISC, L-I-S-C. They're a national consortium, and they have provided the curriculum. So it's a tried and true, tested curriculum around the financial coaching. We could have tried to invent the wheel. Glad we didn't. And Ralph, maybe you can talk a little bit about the curriculum that you guys have seen work well.
So I think the LISC curriculum is great. I will echo that. And at the, we don't have the network up and operational yet, but at the Family Success Center, they use a slightly adapted LISC curriculum there.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent choice.
Our On the Rise Financial Center is sort of powered by, it was the National Federation of Community Development Credit Unions. They recently changed their name to Inclusive without an E, which I think is interesting. But they have a curriculum that I think it's, it's got foundations in Money Smart, which is an FDIC curriculum, as well as there's a lot of kind of community grounding of what curriculum looks like. So right now they do training with Westside Works. So as people are about to graduate with careers, about putting your paycheck to work, which is part of, I think, the Money Smart curriculum and a few other pieces, but also how to start trusting institutions. And because they are part of credit unions, they have different programs that allow people to come back into the system with more forgiving products. So I think that's part of it, right? Which is to be able to give people the tools, but also to hear what it is their dreams are, right? So it's not, I'm gonna give you a budget and I'm gonna tell you what you should spend your money on, but what is it that you wanna achieve for your family, and how do you get there, and how can we help you get there? And so we are starting to think about match savings accounts programs. We are actually just implementing the United Way Achievement Club program, which is going to start getting people into cohorts as they are going through coaching about people who have shared common goals, and then they incentivize each other and reward each other for meeting their goals that they set up. So there's a lot of different ways, and I think we make the mistake of finding evidence-based things and saying this has got to work, but it's thinking about what works best for the people you serve, right?
With Big Brothers Big Sisters. My question is surrounding the idea of empowerment. Ms. Simon, I know you mentioned, kind of having this idea of a broad application to be able to identify different services a family could use, being able to kind of hand off or recommend different resources, but then going as far as to, like you said, make the appointments or provide transportation and things like that, which is great for convenience for our families. But I'm sure it's something we look at a lot at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I'm sure a lot of other nonprofits do as well, of making sure we're able to help, but also still empowering, to not say, okay, I'll just do this for you and then here you go, because that's not really a lesson, it's just giving something. So how do you guys, in working in that collaborative space, make sure you're still empowering people to know what those resources are and know how to do it themselves, as opposed to having to come back to every time when they say, okay, I need a new appointment or I need transportation again this time?
No, I think people have a tremendous sense of agency, right? But because of a lot of different reasons, to me, it's not about the lesson. It is about meeting people where they are, right? And if people say, I cannot make it over there because I don't have transportation, to me, that's not a lesson that's teaching anybody anything, apart from, you have a need, there is a way to get you there, right? Long term, I'm sure that person is going to say, there are very few people who are out there who are saying, I just want everybody to deliver everything for me. I just fundamentally, knowing the people and the voices that I'm hearing, that is not what's happening. Every person you meet, when they tell you their story, when they tell you the difficulty they have of navigating something, there's an exception to every single rule, right? And so I guess I'm struggling with that a little bit, about that, you know, it's about not the hand, it's the hand up, but it's letting that person say, this is the hand up that I need, and then trying to meet that. You know, I have not met a person out there who's saying, oh, well, okay, now can you make this next appointment for me? They would love it if they didn't have to make those appointments, right? So I don't have an answer for you, because I'm sitting with what you just said in terms of that's the lesson. They've lived many lessons, and I think it's our job as folks who are serving the neighborhood to figure out how to help people navigate to the best of their ability, to the point at which they don't need that anymore, right? So
and I would add, you know, I'll share a story about Monica. Monica came to the country as a member of her family. She was blind, fully blind, and had really just never left the confines of the family's tent in their refugee world, where they lived for 20 years in their refugee camp. And the family didn't know that there was ever going to be any more option for her than to live just in the four walls of their little new apartment here in Clarkston. But you know, it was our job to just simply open the door and the window of possibility. And it started with a connection with the Center for Visually Impaired, and where she began to learn Braille. Then we connected her to vocational rehab, where she learned work skills. And then, you know, the issue was transportation. And so ultimately she was wanting more, wanting to do more. And so connected her to MARTA Mobility. And so now all of a sudden she's connected to MARTA Mobility, and she works outside the home today. So it's all about introducing people to the possibility, and them then taking hold of that and running with it.
So it seems to me part of the challenge here is two competing values. One is empowerment of families, and the other is evidence-informed interventions, right? So there's a little bit of a tension between the two of those. One of the ways we try to bridge that is to work with the direct service providers on training and empathic communication. So you're really deeply listening to what people are saying. This is my wife's contribution to integrated services delivery, by the way. And I'm a trainer, in addition to my mad scientist role, and that's not the first time I've been called that, by the way. That's training that I do myself. And you know, I think it begins to address the trust issues when people are really deeply heard, their stories are heard. And then often people kind of come to the solution themselves. So I'll give you a particular example of a young woman at a Family Success Center who was homeless 2 years ago, really struggling, stabilized with the work, health, and income supports. But through that empathic listening, it was, you know, she said, well, I've always wanted to be a nurse. You know, I really want to help people. But you know, I just can't go to college for 4 years. I can't afford that. Remember what I said before about Brownsville and the misperception of what college is? And the counselor said, well, do you know about the accelerated RN program at Guilford Technical Community College? She didn't know anything about it. She's enrolled in that. I mean, she's completed that now. She's completed that. She's working at Cone Health. That little piece of information was critical to her life. Now, so to me, that was sort of the bridge. Hearing what it is that she wanted to do with her life, and then saying, well, here's a community resource to meet it. But just to sort of explain what Guilford Technical Community College is like, it is this huge campus. There's all these, like, I went to a community meeting there a few weeks ago. I couldn't even find a parking space there, much less find a one-year RN program. I mean, it's really complicated to navigate. So that counselor happened to know, and of course this counselor knew the person to call at Guilford Tech and get that person enrolled and make it easy. I think that's a good combination, but they're a little bit in tension with each other, and some of it is just to say that these are slightly in tension, and just sit with that, live with that.
And to ask the question, whose evidence, right?
Right.
Whose evidence says that this is evidence-based? And as funders, we are always about evidence-based. And to me, it's always about go back to the people that you are serving and ask them, is this working? And if it's not working, why? If you're not able to make that appointment, why, right? If you're not able to do this, why?
Yep.
And people will tell you. They will tell you exactly why. We don't ask the question. Yeah. And I've got one question for my panelists too, so.
Yes, my name is Michael Lawrence, and I work at the Child Development Center. And the question I had dealing with Westside Works, my center, we have a national center, the only national center in the state of Georgia, but our center is located in Mechanicsville. And so, like we were saying, a lot of people in the area are transitioning people and everything. So we have a lot of people that lived in the Westside Works area, they live in Mechanicsville now. So based on y'all have some zip codes, and we are right outside the zip codes. So have y'all thought about expanding the zip code? Because a lot of our parents couldn't, when they had the construction on the dome, they couldn't get jobs over there because they weren't in the zip code to get Westside work. So now we had Center Working Families that really, they just recently closed down in December, so we're lacking in workforce now. And it's either the Atlanta workforce, it could be Westside Work, and Westside Work is closer. So I just want to talk about if you thought about expanding.
Yes. Westside Works is now serving folks outside of the 1418 zip codes. And that was always the commitment to the neighborhood, right? That we would focus our programs and our outreach in these neighborhoods. So it was a tiered system. So if you were from English Avenue, Vine City, that you got first preference in coming through programs. And so it is send people over on Lowry and Rock Street. So I had a question, and then this gets back to what Milton was saying, is when we get in these rooms, we talk about everything that's great and that's successful, and so let's talk about what's difficult and what didn't work.
For us, the challenge with the Financial Opportunity Center is proximity. Back to the question about Mechanicsville. If you live in the neighborhood and you work with refugees, the way that it works for us is a lot of people are on foot. They're moving around. They're catching a ride with somebody from their apartment complex. The Financial Opportunity Center works fabulous. We're right in Clarkston. But as we try and integrate this program and serve people across the region, it becomes trickier. And so, is there a mobile concept? Is there a way to make this? Can the financial coach travel? Can the mainstream benefits person be mobile? Can we use technology? So I would say we are bumping up against the limitations of, there is this notion that place-based programming is expensive, but so is mobility. And being mobile. So we're in the tension between program-based and place-based, and we feel that tension very much.
I think there are a few main challenges. One is that I think people have gotten good at sort of talking about collaboration, but really getting deeply into collaboration. Nonprofits tend to look at the world and say, well, my funding is dependent upon doing as many things for this person as I can. And so, kind of breaking that down has been hard. The other one that's been really difficult in Greensboro, oddly, is which population to start with. Like we have this, we have this big initiative, and we have this agreement with the early childhood initiative, and that has every provider who works with seniors very upset with us. And we've been very careful to explain, well, see the chart, there's a full implementation in 2 years, and people are like, well, I work with seniors, and I want seniors to be served. So, it's not like people aren't coming from a good place. I mean, they're advocating for seniors. But we also know from implementation science that, going from 0 to 60 is not a good idea, that you have to start with a specific population. So there's just, my father-in-law was an engineer, and he used to say there are no engineering problems, there are only people problems, spoken like a true engineer. I kind of know what he gets at. I mean, it's just, it's the difficulty kind of working through these issues with people who are of goodwill. It's just, it's just hard work.
Yeah, and I would agree with all of that, that it is about building trust and relationships with the nonprofit providers, who a lot of whom have been working in the West Side for a long time. Because for so long, I think scarcity of resources created the system of like, well, we're gonna try and solve all of the problems, even though they might not have been best suited to tackle all of those pieces, and to start trusting each other to say, okay, well, I know if I call Ralph, he will answer the phone and he will get the right person to start working with this person. When we called people together to start working on Westside Connect, as you have a power of a funder, because we were funding everybody, that people felt like they had to show up. And what we're trying to do is break that thing of like, you have to show up, to I need to show up because this is integral to the work that I do. And I think people are all here because they want to serve. And so, but actually having staff-to-staff relationships, right? So that it's not about the executive director level, it is about the people who are actually working with residents every day, to know that if I call the person who works for Ralph, like I trust them and I know them, and I know that then they will also tell me the information I need, that so-and-so showed up, or that they're working on this, or that this is still a barrier. And so it's creating those relationships, and that's what we're trying to do organically, rather than the power of the funder saying it's about money and that we're going to give everybody more money. And eventually we can get to that, right? That you might need more operational funds to do this work in a different way. But you actually need the relationships between people and program staff to make this work.
And if I can just add, we work with a lot of migrants, and they have come from Central America. And as we knit families back together based on the border crisis and family separation, and we're reconnecting children to kin and to extended family, and wouldn't you know, the Child Protective system has been called out to homes, and so we want to support families with behavioral health and other systems, and we have that resource, and we thought this will be wonderful. We'll connect them to behavioral health, and we didn't understand why they didn't want to use the system. There was resistance, and it was a culture. We were being culturally insensitive. We didn't know that a lot of behavioral health, in those cultures, comes from the local faith community, and so it was helpful for us to learn that, so that we could then engage the local faith community to be involved in providing some of that therapy and those necessary, behavioral health supports that our clients would turn to if they were delivered by the faith community, as opposed to other more institutional settings that we're accustomed to here in the States.
Are we at time? Well, thank you.
That's me. One of the elements of the job that I have is I get to be the official thanker. Thank you, Ralph, John, Siganthi. Thank you for being here, but more importantly, thank you very much for what you do. You're part of the solution. People, place, programs. How do we bring them together? These are the themes that have emerged today. It strikes me that, and I think this InForum program is part of the evolution of this, but it strikes me that we have created a common vernacular, that we have an emerging lexicon around integrated service delivery and all the things that matter. But we at the United Way feel very much what Ralph articulated, which is how do we get people to actually behave differently in terms of collaboration in particular. I think it starts with having the common language. You can't accomplish something together if you're talking about different things. And I'll just take a second to remind you sort of why we do this. Putting aside all the worthy work that's being done on the west side, there are a handful of numerous zip codes around the 13-county metropolitan area we serve where the chances of a child being born in poverty, getting out of poverty by the time they're employment age, are less than 1 in 25. I don't know if anybody would take those odds. I certainly would not. But it's all over the metropolitan area. And what's common about these neighborhoods is there's no transportation, they're in food deserts, there's no early education, no quality early education, there's no bank, right? The whole host of complex things. So I'm delighted that you guys are participating with us and talking about how we try to tackle on an integrated basis the common problems that we face. You know, Atlanta is dead last in income mobility of the metropolitan areas in the United States. This is appalling. It's a scourge. It's dead last in the multiple between the top wage earners and the bottom wage earners. I am not proud of my society for having that circumstance prevail. And then on a personal note, I just want to add that I was struck by, I think it was your slide, John, the child homelessness. We are getting some good publicity and we are making progress around homelessness in the city, in the city limits, and to some extent in DeKalb County. Suburban homelessness is increasing at an alarming rate, and homeless children are severely undercounted, right? So to remind us what we're sort of about, what the United Way is about, we look at homelessness through the lens of kids, largely, not exclusively, but largely, right? So if you're 6 years old and you're going to a different school every 60 days, and 30 of those 60 days you slept in your mother's car, the chances of you succeeding are almost non-existent. So these are the challenges we have to deal with in Atlanta. The United Way is about these challenges. We hope you guys get something from these InForums, and we hope you'll keep coming back. It's a very good discussion forum, tremendous content, tremendous input, so we thank you guys. So now I think I have a bit of a housekeeping job up here. Dates. And also, okay, the C3 that's a big deal. Sorry, the C3 conference in April is a big deal. Come and rub elbows with your fellow providers. Now, if your agency or service or company has an event on the calendar, go to your smartphone and go to menti.com and enter this code, and you can share your organizations and events, names, and dates. And Tiffany, I think it comes up on this screen, doesn't it, if you do that? So if any of you guys have an event coming up, follow these instructions. So I think I may have preached a little bit, giving you a reminder of why we do what we do. I believe we build the future state by looking after the most vulnerable. We all know who those are. That's what this InForum is about. We hope you'll be here in February, February 21st for the next gathering. And again, thank you so much for everything that you do. Has anything come up? Not yet? Anybody putting an event up there? Anyway, have a great day and thank you so much. Thank you guys.